Hello everyone, I'm Chris, and this is everything you need to know before watching Thor Love and Thunder releasing July 8th. Real quick, if you're watching this video and you haven't yet subscribed, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. The fourth installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe of 2022, Thor Love and Thunder, will give Chris Hemsworth the honor of being the first actor in the titular role of 4 different movies in the MCU. Love and Thunder will also be Thor's 10th appearance in the franchise, and we'll leave a list of said 10 projects in the description for anyone that hasn't watched them already. But if you have seen them and are looking for a quick refresher before the new movie, then you've come to the right place. Long ago in 965 AD, the frost giants of Jotunheim looked to conquer Earth and threatened to plunge the mortal world into a new ice age. But humanity was saved by the Asgardians, led by Odin, king of Asgard. Asgard took the source of their power, the casket of ancient winters, ending the last great war and creating peace between the 9 realms for over 1,000 years. In over said 1,000 years, Odin and his wife Frigga raised 2 sons, Thor and Loki, with both having desires of one day becoming king. Now in 2011, Thor, also known as the God of Thunder, has been chosen to become the new king of Asgard. But before Odin can follow through with the proclamation, he senses the presence of 3 frost giants infiltrating Asgard in an attempt to take back the casket of ancient winters. So he summons the Destroyer, an enchanted Asgardian automaton, to kill them. Thor, enraged that his coronation was interrupted, gathers Loki, also known as the God of Mischief, close friend Sif, and the Warriors 3, Volstagg, Fangel, and Hogun, to travel to Jotunheim through the Bifrost Bridge, a dimensional energy which allows instantaneous travel within the 9 realms, protected by Heimdall, who can see and hear nearly everything that happens in the 9 realms, but was somehow unable to see the 3 Frost Giants' invasion. They meet with Laufey, king of the Frost Giants, and demand an answer to how his people got into Asgard. But after Laufey begins mocking Thor and his father, a battle ensues. Things look desperate for the Asgardians, who are eventually completely surrounded by Frost Giants. But luckily they're saved by Odin's arrival, who attempts to restore peace, but Laufey says there will be no reconciliation. Upon returning to Asgard, Odin confronts Thor, furious that he's dragged Asgard back into war, and claims he's not fit to be king, before stripping him of his powers and banishing him to Earth along with his hammer Mjolnir, which he leaves protected by an enchantment that deems only the worthy will be able to wield it. Thor then lands in New Mexico, and is found by astrophysicist Jane Foster, along with her assistant Darcy Lewis and mentor Dr. Eric Selvig when they hit him with their van. Foster had been studying a mysterious weather event, and traveled to where she believed the source of the anomalies to be. But when arriving there, they were surrounded by the wormhole from which Thor crash landed on Earth, which caused them to crash into him. They drop him off at a hospital, but eventually retrieve him after realizing he had been inside the vortex, and take him out to lunch to learn more. Meanwhile, back on Asgard, Loki confronts Odin about an odd reaction he had when being touched by a frost giant during their earlier battle, and this leads Odin to reveal he actually adopted Loki following their victory over the frost giants all those years ago, believing Loki could create permanent peace between the races, and that Loki is the birth child of Laufey.
You know, it all makes sense now why you favored Thor all these years. Because no matter how much you claim to love me, you're gonna never have a frost giant sitting on the throne of Asgard.
The stress and sadness caused by his 2 sons leaves Odin weak, and he falls into the Odin sleep, a state of deep sleep to restore his power, leaving Loki as interim king of Asgard. Back on Earth, Thor overhears 2 men speaking of an immovable satellite they'd found in the desert. Suspecting it to be Mjolnir, Thor asks Jane to take him there, and says he'll answer any questions she may have if she does. She eventually agrees, but when they arrive at the hammer's location, they find the site's already been taken over by the Strategic Homeland and Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, aka SHIELD. So Thor breaks in and takes out some SHIELD agents before making his way to the hammer, but when he attempts to lift it, he finds himself unable to and shouts in anger at the realization of his powerlessness. He allows himself to be taken into custody, and while in custody, Loki appears and makes Thor believe that Odin had died due to the stress caused by his banishment and the threat of a new war, before revealing himself as the new king of Asgard. He also claims that he can't allow Thor to return home due to his mother Frigga prohibiting his return, which is also a lie. Loki then bids farewell before Dr. Selvig shows up and manages to get Thor released. Loki then arrives on Jotunheim, where it's revealed that he was behind the Frost Giants' earlier invasion, as a way to protect Asgard from his brother's idiotic rule. He meets with Laufey and offers him an opportunity to kill Odin and return Jotunheim to its former glory, while giving Loki full reign to the throne of Asgard, and Laufey agrees. Upon returning to Asgard, Loki is greeted by a suspicious Heimdall, who can neither see nor hear him while on his trip to Jotunheim, but Loki demands that he obey his new king, and not to open the Bifrost to anyone without his approval. Back on Earth, Thor and Jane have a heart-to-heart where he tells her how grateful he is for her kindness towards him, and that she must not give up on her research, before the 2 fall asleep under the stars. Meanwhile on Asgard, Heimdall allows the Bifrost Bridge to be opened for the Warriors 3 and Sif, who don't trust Loki as king, in an attempt to bring Thor back. But when Loki learns of their plans, he sends the Destroyer to follow after them and relieves Heimdall of his duties as gatekeeper before freezing freezing him with the casket of ancient winters. Just as the four find Thor on Earth and inform him of Loki's lies, the Destroyer arrives and attacks them. So Thor approaches it and bargains with Loki to spare the lives of the people of Earth in return for his, and Loki agrees, having the Destroyer hit Thor with a fatal strike. But his sacrifice deems him worthy to wield Mjolnir once again, and with his restored power, he easily defeats the Destroyer. He then promises Jane he'll return for her, before giving her a kiss goodbye, and returning to Asgard through the Bifrost, opened by Heimdall, who fought out of his frozen state. But it appears it's too late, as the Frost Giants have already begun their invasion of Asgard, with Laufey standing over a sleeping Odin. But just as he goes for a fatal stab, Loki kills him, with his true plan being to gain his father's approval. Loki then looks to conquer all of the 9 realms, and begins extending the Bifrost Bridge so it grows large enough to rip Jotunheim apart. But Thor is able to stop him by destroying the bridge with his hammer. The bridge's destruction creates a void beneath them that they nearly fall into before being caught by a now awakened Odin, who Loki begs for acceptance, but Odin declines. So Loki allows himself to fall into the deep abyss of space, entering a wormhole created by the sudden termination of the bridge. Thor, saddened by the loss of his brother and inability to see Jane, admits he's not ready to be king, before meeting with Heimdall, who informs him that he can see Jane on Earth searching for him. Also on Earth, Dr. Selvig is met by Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., who says Selvig's work has impressed a lot of people, before showing him a glowing blue cube called the Tesseract, claiming it could contain unlimited power, and asks if he'd be willing to study it.
Well, I guess that's worth a look.
Well, I guess that's worth a look.
Roughly a year later, Nick Fury and Lieutenant Agent Maria Hill arrive at the Joint Dark Energy Mission facility, where Dr. Selvig holds experiments regarding the Tesseract. But the Tesseract's behavior has recently become unstable, emitting low levels of gamma radiation, and with the Tesseract being a doorway to the other end of space, Special Agent Clint Barton, an expert marksman also known as Hawkeye, suspects that this could be the cause of something at the other end. Suddenly, the Tesseract opens a portal from which Loki appears, armed with a powerful scepter. After falling into the deep abyss of space, Loki encountered the Other, the servant of a mysterious warlord, who in exchange for recovering the Tesseract, promised Loki command over the Chitauri, their army of cyborgs, as well as possession of the scepter to conquer humanity. Upon his arrival, Loki immediately kills multiple S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and enslaves the remaining agents using his scepter, including Dr. Selvig and Barton, whom he orders to shoot down Fury before aiding him in his escape with the Tesseract as the portal collapses in on itself and the facility blows up. Fury and Hill manage to survive the explosion though, and Loki's arrival prompts Fury to reactivate the Avengers initiative. Agent Natasha Romanoff, an expert spy and assassin also known as Black Widow, is sent to recruit Dr. Bruce Banner, a renowned scientist and expert in gamma radiation, who after a failed experiment to enhance human performance, gained the ability to transform into a giant rage-fueled green monster when he's angered, provoked, or excited. While Fury meets with Steve Rogers, a super soldier known as Captain America, and Agent Phil Coulson meets with Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, to help win their battle. Cap, Iron Man, and Black Widow later find Loki in Germany, and after a short brawl, he willingly surrenders. Although they're suspicious to why he gave up so easily, they still plan to escort Loki onto the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, an advanced flying command center that doubles as an aircraft, when they hear sudden rumblings of thunder above them.
What's the matter? Scared of a little lightning?
I'm not overly fond of what follows.
Thor then arrives on board and takes out Cap and Iron Man before exiting the aircraft with Loki. After learning of Loki's arrival on Earth and with the Bifrost destroyed, Odin was forced to channel dark energy to send Thor back to Earth so he could stop Loki and bring him back to Asgard along with the Tesseract. Cap and Iron Man see Thor as a threat though, so the three brawl for a bit before eventually agreeing to work together. They then transport and imprison Loki on the helicarrier, where Thor informs them of his plan to use the Tesseract to open a portal into space and bring the Chitauri army to Earth. Meanwhile, Stark and Banner are attempting to locate the Tesseract, but just as they trace its location, there's a sudden explosion caused by Barton and Loki's other enslaved agents that separates them. The attack causes Banner to transform into the Hulk and chase after Romanoff, so Thor is forced to intervene and battle the monster until Hulk ends up leaping out of the aircraft and onto a fighter jet sent by Fury in an attempt to prevent Hulk from destroying the helicarrier. But amongst the chaos, Loki manages to escape imprisonment and the ship with the Tesseract, although without Barton, who Romanoff had knocked out to break Loki's control over him. The heroes eventually find Loki at Stark Tower in New York City, just as the wormhole is being opened, and with the Chitauri army entering through it, all 6 Avengers assemble together to fight against them. But Nick Fury's superiors don't believe the Avengers will be enough to stop Loki and his army, so they send a nuclear missile towards Midtown Manhattan. Fury warns Stark about the incoming missile, and he intercepts it and flies up with it into the wormhole, before sending it straight into the Chitauri mothership, which disables their army. The Avengers' victory in the Battle of New York raises concern from the Other, who worries that humanity may be more powerful than they originally thought, but his master, revealed to be the Mad Titan Thanos, just turns to him with a sadistic smile. Thor, along with Loki and the Tesseract, then returns to Asgard, where Loki is brought to Odin and is given a life sentence in prison for his crimes against humanity. 1 year later in Vanaheim, Thor leads Asgard in a battle against the Marauders, a group of invaders that have been terrorizing the Nine Realms since the destruction of the Bifrost, which has now been rebuilt. And following their victory, the Asgardians, other than Hogun, who stays on Vanaheim to help his people, return to Asgard and celebrate the reformed peace between the Nine Realms, with it being the first time in 2 years all were at peace. Thor is then approached with the possibility of taking the throne by his father, but Thor claims he's not yet ready to be king, to Odin's dismay, who believes this is due to his feelings for Jane. Later, as he's done every day since leaving her, Thor meets with Heimdall to ask how Jane's doing, but this time Heimdall is unable to see her. Prior to this on Earth, Jane, Darcy, and Darcy's intern Ian were in London exploring strange signals being picked up by her scientific equipment that hadn't been detected since the events in New Mexico. They traveled to where the signal was the highest and arrived in an abandoned storage house, inside of which they see a number of portals linking Earth to different worlds and altering the laws of physics. Suddenly, her equipment begins to beep rapidly, and she follows it to a portal that she is then sucked into. She finds herself in a dark chasm and sees a red substance that she reaches out towards, but in doing so, she allows it to attach to her and infest her body, causing her to pass out. When she wakes up, she's suddenly back in London and is informed by Darcy that she'd been gone for 5 hours, prompting her to call the police. They're then unexpectedly met by Thor, returning to Earth for the first time since the Battle of New York, and he's greeted by a slap across the face by Jane, angry that he hadn't visited her in 2 years. Police then approach Jane and attempt to arrest her for trespassing, but once the officer touches her, a powerful force pushes him back. Thor, worried for her well-being, takes her back to Asgard to be looked at by an Asgardian physician. This angers Odin, and he orders that she be taken back to Earth. But again, when being touched by one of the guards, the surge of power blasts them back, and Odin recognizes this to be the cause of an ancient relic inside of her, called the Ether. He explains that millennia ago, the Dark Elves reigned absolute and unchallenged under their leader Malekith, who had made a weapon out of their darkness called the Ether, an ever-changing fluid, seeking out host bodies and drawing strength from their life force. Malekith attempted to use the Ether to return the universe to darkness, but Odin's father Bor managed to defeat him and ushered in a peace that lasted thousands of years. Odin claims all of the Dark Elves were killed, but as it turns out, Malekith is still alive and has recently awakened on Svartalfheim after sensing the Ether's activation, signaling the beginning of the Convergence, an event that occurs every 5,000 years where the worlds align perfectly and during which the borders between worlds become blurred, hence why reality on Earth had been altered. And upon his wake, Malekith proclaims that he will reclaim the Ether and restore their world. He looks to begin his conquest by sending his trusted and loyal lieutenant Algrim to be captured by the Asgardians while in disguise as a marauder. And once inside Asgard's prison, Algrim uses vile technology to take the form of the superpowered warrior Curse. He then breaks out of his cell and frees a majority of their prisoners, except for Loki, forcing Thor to leave Jane with Frigga while he attempts to fight off the escaped prisoners. The chaos allows Malekith to lead a squadron of ships into the palace, where he's met by Frigga looking to protect Jane. The two battle until Frigga becomes overwhelmed with Curse joining the fight, and this allows Malekith to make his way towards Jane. But when he attempts to grab her, she's revealed to be a holographic replica created by Frigga, who Malekith then turns his attention to before having her killed by Curse. Thor then arrives, but he's just a moment too late and they're able to escape. Following a funeral ceremony for Frigga and the fallen Asgardians, a grieving Odin has Jane confined. Thor confronts him about this and suggests that they should take Jane to Svartalfheim so they can lure Malekith away from Asgard. But Odin doesn't want to risk losing and would rather fight to the last Asgardian breath. So Thor, valuing the lives of his people, puts together a plan with Heimdall, Fandral, Volstagg, and Sif to break Loki out of prison so that he can get them off of Asgard without using the Bifrost. Loki agrees to take part in their escape, seeking vengeance for his mother's death, and so he, Thor, and Jane travel through Loki's secret pathway to Svartalfheim, where they're quickly met by Malekith. Now needing his help in battle, Thor releases Loki from his handcuffs, but just as he does, Loki seemingly betrays him once again and stabs him in the stomach, prompting Thor to summon Mjolnir, but as he does, Loki slices off his hand. He then offers Jane up to Malekith in return for a good seat from which to watch Asgard burn, and Malekith agrees before draining the ether from her body. But once the ether is completely separated from Jane's body, Loki puts down his illusions and reveals his betrayal to have been a ruse. Thor then summons Mjolnir and attempts to destroy the ether, but fails as it's indestructible, and Malekith is able to absorb its power before escaping with his minions, while Curse battles Thor. Curse gains the upper hand in their battle, but before he can kill Thor, Loki stabs him through the torso with a sword. However, Curse is unaffected by his attack and pulls Loki into the sword to stab him as well, but this allows Loki to press one of Curse's implosion bombs and kill Curse as a result. Loki then apologizes to his brother, who says he'll inform their father of his sacrifice, but Loki claims he didn't do it for him before seemingly dying in Thor's arms. With Malekith now in possession of the ether and them being stuck on Svartalfheim, it appears that they failed in stopping him. But suddenly, Jane receives a phone call and her miraculously having signal brings her to the realization that a portal must be close by. They quickly find said portal and walk through it, sending them back to London, where they meet up with Darcy, Ian and Dr. Selvig, with the latter having been studying the effects of the convergence for months, and having developed devices that can teleport anything to different worlds. Selvig pulls out a map to find the coordinates of the convergence based on the previous convergence, during which there are objects built to map where the convergence would peak. And with this information, Jane speculates that Malekith will look to fire the ether at a spot where all 9 realms are connected, creating a universal impact. So they must hold him off until the convergence is over. They eventually find the peak of the convergence, and as they're setting up their plan, Malekith arrives and engages in a battle against Thor, during which the two are sent through various portals throughout the city by Jane, who's using Selvig's device. Malekith eventually gains the opportunity to begin unleashing the ether, but Thor puts a stop to him by stabbing him through the chest with one of Selvig's devices, that he then uses to send him back to Svartalfheim, along with his ship that crashes on top of him and kills him. Before long, Thor returns to Asgard and speaks with Odin, who says the alignment has brought all the realms together and offers Thor the chance to take the throne, but Thor declines, claiming even Loki understood rule as he never could, and instead he decides to leave Asgard to be closer to Jane, thanking Odin as he does.
Thank you.
2 years after leaving Asgard, Thor joins back up with the Avengers to track down and eliminate the remaining members of Hydra, a neo-Nazi terrorist group originally formed during World War II, who've gained possession of Loki's scepter and have been conducting experiments with it. They managed to capture Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, the man behind the experiments, and Iron Man finds the scepter. But just as he goes to collect it, a vision is implanted into his mind by Wanda Maximoff, a mutant that had survived Strucker's experiments along with her twin brother Pietro, with her gaining the ability to manipulate psychic energy and him gaining superhuman speed. The projected vision shows Stark standing amongst the ruins of Earth, where he finds the rest of the Avengers dead following a fatal attack from the Chitauri army, before he snaps back to reality. The Maximoffs then allow him to retrieve the scepter, believing his fear will lead to his own undoing, and this nearly comes to fruition, when after discovering a net of neurons within the scepter that could be reconfigured into artificial intelligence, Stark looks to use it to create a peacekeeping program named Ultron to act as a metaphorical suit of armor around the world. He works alongside Bruce Banner over the next 3 days to create Ultron, but the two have minimal success and decide to put their work on hold to celebrate their victory with the rest of the Avengers. During said celebration, the heroes take turns attempting to lift Mjolnir, but none of them appear to be deemed worthy to do so. But while they're distracted doing this, Ultron activates, and upon accessing the internet, determines the greatest threat to peace on Earth is humanity itself, and that they must be eliminated. Ultron then gains control over Stark's Iron Legion, and uses it to attack the Avengers. And although most of the Iron Legion is destroyed, one drone escapes with the scepter and heads to Strucker's Hydra base, where Ultron uses their technology to begin building an army of robotic drones, as well as his body of armor. Later, Ultron manages to recruit the Maximoff twins, as they share disdain for Stark since their parents had been killed by one of Stark Industries' bombs, and travels with them to South Africa to acquire vibranium, a nearly indestructible Wakandan metal from arms dealer Ulysses Claw. But the Avengers track them down, and a battle ensues, during which Wanda implants visions into the minds of Black Widow, Cap, and Thor, with Thor in his vision seeing Heimdall on Asgard, who claims Thor's leading them to hell, and that they're all already dead, before he then sees a vision of 6 gem-like objects.
You're a destroyer, Odinson. See where your power leads.
Wanda then implants a vision into Banner's mind that causes him to lose control as he transforms into the Hulk and attacks the Avengers, only being stopped after Stark suits up in his Hulkbuster armor and drops a building on top of it. While the Avengers go into hiding following the destruction caused by their battle, Thor leaves and heads to the Water of Sight in an attempt to find the meaning to the vision he saw earlier. Meanwhile, Ultron, Wanda, and Pietro head to Dr. Helen Cho's laboratory, who earlier in the film used her regeneration cradle, a piece of medical technology that can be used to create synthetic tissue, to heal a wound sustained by Clint Barton during their battle with Strucker's men. And Ultron uses the scepter to take control of her mind, and orders her to create a powerful synthetic body using the vibranium samples and the scepter as its power source. Once the body's created, Ultron begins transferring his consciousness into it, which in turn allows Wanda to look into his mind, and within it she discovers Ultron's plan to destroy all of humanity. Now realizing they'd been fighting on the wrong side, Wanda releases Cho from the scepter's control, before leaving the lab with Pietro. The Avengers then arrive at the lab soon after, just as Ultron begins to make his escape with the cradle, and eventually the heroes manage to fight off Ultron's bots and retrieve the cradle, before taking it to Avengers Tower. In an attempt to rectify their mistake with Ultron, Stark and Banner begin to upload Stark's advanced AI system Jarvis into the synthetic body instead, and the upload is completed when Thor returns and uses the power of thunder to create Vision. While at the Water of Sight, Thor had learned that the 6 stones he saw in his vision were the 6 immensely powerful Infinity Stones, and that he'd already encountered 3 of them, those 3 being the Space Stone within the Tesseract, the Ether, which is a liquefied form of the Reality Stone, and the Mind Stone that was inside the scepter and is now embedded into the 4 of Vision. Upon awakening, Vision proves himself to be worthy, handing Mjolnir to Thor. So the Avengers head to Sokovia, where they battle and destroy Ultron and his army. The Avengers then establish a new Avengers facility in upstate New York, while Thor decides to leave Earth to search throughout the cosmos for the remaining Infinity Stones, as well as to make sure that they don't fall into the wrong hands. After spending the next couple years unsuccessfully searching for stones, during which he and Jane had broken up, Thor ends up captured on Muspelheim by the fire demon Surtur. Long ago, Odin had battled Surtur to prevent him from initiating Ragnarok, the prophesied destruction of Asgard, and after defeating the fire demon, Odin took the source of his power, the eternal flame, and locked it in his vault. But now, after revealing that Odin's no longer present on Asgard, Surtur claims he will soon join his crown with the eternal flame and initiate Ragnarok once again. His plans are quickly thwarted though, after Thor breaks from his chains and incapacitates Surtur to take his crown. Thor then exits through the Bifrost and returns to Asgard for the first time in years, and upon his return, he learns that the Bifrost is now under the watch of Asgardian Scourge, after Odin had apparently charged Heimdall with negligence of duty following the events of Thor the Dark World, prompting him to go on the run. A curious Thor then finds Odin watching a reenactment of Loki's supposed death following their battle against Malekith under a giant statue of Loki, and Thor deduces that it's actually just Loki impersonating Odin. He forces Loki to take him to their father, but when they find him, he claims that their mother is calling for him, and that he doesn't have much time. With his death imminent, he confesses that before Thor or Loki's birth, he had a daughter named Hela, the goddess of death, who was at the forefront of Asgard's rise to power as his executioner until her violent appetite got out of control, and he was forced to imprison her. But with him dying, she'll return and cause the destruction of Asgard. Following this revelation, Odin passes away, and immediately following his death, Hela arrives and orders the brothers to kneel. Thor responds by throwing Mjolnir at her, but she shockingly catches and destroys it, prompting Loki to summon for the Bifrost to be opened. But as they transport through it, Hela follows after them and forces the two out of the beam. She then arrives on Asgard and immediately kills Volstagg and Fandral, who had taken over as the Bifrost gatekeepers while Scourge was made the janitor. Hela takes a liking to Scourge though, and recruits him as she looks to take over the kingdom. Meanwhile, Thor crash lands on Sakaar, a planet covered in junk where he's met and attacked by some scavengers, until another spaceship lands near them, and the woman inside shoots them down. She then throws a small disc at Thor's neck that electrocutes him and knocks him out, before taking and selling him to the ruler of Sakaar, the Grand Master, who hosts a gladiatorial contest called the Contest of Champions that he forces Thor to take part in, pitting him against his champion with the reward of freedom if he's victorious. As he explains this, Thor sees Loki has also ended up on Sakaar, but Loki says he's looking to earn the favor of the Grand Master, and doesn't offer Thor any help. Thor is then thrown into the gladiators' quarters, where he meets Korg, an exiled Cronin, and his friend Meek. Korg tries to warn against fighting the Grandmaster's champion, claiming no one has ever defeated him, but Thor stays confident and prepares to fight, even being given a new haircut. Moments before his fight, he finds the woman that had captured him earlier, and recognizes her tattoo as the symbol of the Asgardian Valkyrie. He asks for her help, but she refuses, so he calls her a coward as he heads out to fight the champion. And it turns out the Grandmaster's champion is the Hulk, who after leaving Earth in a Quinjet, landed on Sakaar and earned the title of champion. Thor's glad to see Hulk, but in his excitement, he makes the mistake of calling him Banner, and Hulk attacks him. The two battle, and eventually Hulk gets the upper hand, but just as it appears he might kill Thor, Thor sees a vision of his father that causes his powers to surge. But just as he gains the upper hand, the Grandmaster shocks him with the disc in his neck, effectively winning Hulk the fight. Back on Asgard, Hela's met by and subsequently kills the entire Asgardian army led by Hogun, before making her way to the palace and entering Odin's vault, that's revealed to have a mausoleum of fallen Asgardian soldiers beneath it. She then uses the power of the eternal flame to revive the fallen soldiers, as well as her giant Asgardian wolf Fenris to be used as her army to conquer all realms. With her now being the queen, she claims she needs an executioner of her own, and gives Scourge the mantle before the two in her army head to the Bifrost Dome to begin her conquest. But when they arrive, the sword to open the bridge is nowhere to be found, as it had been stolen earlier by Heimdall, who's been slowly organizing a resistance since her arrival. Thor, meanwhile, awakens in Hulk's room while Hulk's taking a bath, and tries convincing Hulk to join him in returning to Asgard to stop Hela. Hulk declines at first, but eventually agrees, even helping him get a hold of the remote connected to the disc in his neck from Valkyrie, who Thor then attempts to recruit as well. She declines. With his champion missing, the Grand Master calls upon Loki and Valkyrie to search for him and Thor, but Loki suspects Valkyrie aided them in their escape, and attacks her, eventually learning she's a Valkyrie, and forcing her to relive the memory of her fellow soldiers being killed by Hela. And reliving the memory ends up being the deciding factor in her agreeing to help Thor, who she brings a captured Loki to as a peace offering. Loki eventually ends up joining the team as well, thanks to him having gained possession of the access codes to the Grandmaster's garage containing his ships, and after recruiting Korg, Meek, and the other imprisoned gladiators before a successful aerial battle against the Grandmaster, they managed to make it to Asgard. Upon his return, Thor battles Hela, and within said battle, Thor loses his eye. Their mostly one-sided brawl nearly comes to an end, as Hela strangles Thor to death. But Thor once again has a vision of his father that helps him realize his true power and allows him to take out Hela, before entering a battle alongside Loki, Valkyrie, and the Hulk against her army, with them later being joined by Scourge, who ends up sacrificing his life for the people of Asgard. But still, Thor realizes their powers won't be enough to stop Hela, so he sends Loki to Odin's vault to join Surtur's crown with the Eternal Flame. And as the heroes and the people of Asgard escape the planet, Surtur initiates Ragnarok and destroys Asgard, killing Hela. The people of Asgard then begin their journey through space for a new home, as Thor and Loki finally appear to begin a healthy relationship. But as they travel, a giant spaceship appears before attacking them, and the ship is soon revealed to be that of a returning Thanos, one of the galaxy's most powerful beings, backed by his army of followers known as the Black Order, on a quest to collect the 6 Infinity Stones with the objective of using them to bring stability to the universe while wiping out half of all life, as he believes its massive population would inevitably cause it to perish. Having already gained possession of the Power Stone, Thanos has arrived to collect the Tesseract containing the Space Stone, which had been stolen from Odin's vault by Loki moments before he joined Surtur's crown with the Eternal Flame. But before he can do so, he's attacked by Hulk, who initially has full control in the fight, but the momentum quickly shifts as Thanos incapacitates him. Seeing few options before him, Heimdall channels dark energy to summon Hulk to Earth so he can inform the others of the coming conflict, prompting Thanos to stab Heimdall through the heart. Thor claims he'll die for that, but Thanos doesn't seem worried as he adds the Space Stone to his Infinity Gauntlet before ordering the children of Thanos to invade Earth and collect the Mind and Time Stones, while he collects the Reality Stone that had been left on Nowhere with the Collector by the Asgardians, and the Soul Stone. But before they exit, Loki reappears and attempts to gain the favor of Thanos once again. It's quickly revealed to be a ruse though, when he attempts to stab Thanos with a dagger, but Thanos is able to thwart his attack using the Space Stone before grabbing him by the throat and snapping his neck. He and his army then exit the ship as it blows to pieces with Thor inside, but Thor manages to survive the explosion and is left floating throughout space until he slams into the ship of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Star-Lord, Gamora, Drax, Groot, Rocket, and Mantis, who've had their own run-ins with Thanos in the past due to Gamora being his adopted daughter turned enemy. The group eventually decides to split up, with Thor being accompanied by Rocket and Groot to Nidavellir, one of the 9 realms and home of the dwarves, who serve as blacksmiths and create weapons such as Mjolnir, while the rest of the Guardians head to Nowhere where the Reality Stone was being kept. But when the Guardians get there, it turns out they're too late, with Thanos having already collected the Reality Stone that he uses to fight them off before escaping with Gamora. He then takes Gamora to Vormir, where they're met by the Red Skull, keeper of the Soul Stone, who informs them that in order to gain possession of the Soul Stone, you must sacrifice the soul of that which you love. So a saddened Thanos sacrifices Gamora and throws her off the cliff to collect the stone. He then arrives on his home planet Titan, where he's ambushed by the Guardians, who formed an alliance with Gamora's adopted sister Nebula, as well as Iron Man and 2 other heroes from Earth, Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, with the latter being the protector of the Time Stone. Eventually, Mantis managed to use her powers to put Thanos half to sleep, but Star-Lord, who'd been in an intimate relationship with Gamora, becomes furious after learning Thanos had killed her and punches him multiple times, unfortunately causing him to regain consciousness just as they were about to take the gauntlet off. He then completely gains the upper hand against the heroes, eventually gaining possession of the Time Stone, and now in possession of 5 of the 6 stones, Thanos heads to Earth where he kills Vision to collect the final Infinity Stone. But before he can use them, Thor reappears, now equipped with a new weapon, Stormbreaker, that he launches into Thanos' shoulder. Thor repeats his claim from earlier that he would die for what he did, but Thanos responds by saying,
You should have gone for the head.
And with the power of the 6 stones, Thanos does indeed wipe out half of all life, including each of the Guardians of the Galaxy outside of Rocket and Nebula, with a single snap of his fingers before escaping from Earth. 3 weeks after the snap, Thor, along with the remaining Avengers, finds Thanos in retirement on a faraway planet, and after learning he had used the stones to destroy the stones, Thor beheads him. Over the next 5 years, Thor falls into a deep depression, being unable to cope with the deaths of his loved ones, his breakup with Jane, and him not having beheaded Thanos to begin with. During this time, he's been living with Korg and Meek on New Asgard, spending his days drinking and gaming, until 2023 when he's met by Hulk and Rocket, who inform him that the remaining Avengers have figured out a way to travel through time and collect the Infinity Stones from past timelines that they'll hopefully be able to use to bring back everyone that was lost. Thor agrees to join them in their time heist, and travels with Rocket back to 2013 to retrieve the Reality Stone on Asgard, on the same day of his mother Frigga's death. While Rocket looks to extract the ether from Jane, Thor accidentally runs into his mother, who quickly realizes he's from the future, and he vents to her about each of his failures. Frigga bestows one last bit of wisdom unto him, advising him to follow his own path rather than try to live up to what he's supposed to be, which helps him recover from his depressed state. He then gives her a hug goodbye before summoning a 2013 variant of Mjolnir and returning to his timeline with Rocket and the Reality Stone. The rest of the Avengers also return with the other 5 stones, and Hulk, being the only Avenger that can handle the stone's gamma signature, puts on the Infinity Gauntlet and snaps his fingers to bring back everyone lost in the blip, severely injuring his arm. Just then, a 2014 variant of Thanos that had learned of their plans arrives with his army and blows up the Avengers facility. Thor, Cap, and Iron Man confront and battle against the Mad Titan, but Thanos gains the upper hand on the trio and nearly stabs Thor through the heart after snatching Stormbreaker out of the air until he's hit by Mjolnir, summoned by Captain America, who's deemed worthy to wield it. Cap brings the fight to Thanos, but eventually the momentum shifts back in Thanos' favor, until suddenly the Avengers lost in the blip return and join the surviving Avengers in their battle, which ends when Iron Man uses the power of the stones and sacrifices himself to wipe out Thanos and his army. The Avengers return each of the stones as well as Mjolnir back to their respective timelines, and Thor decides to make Valkyrie the Queen of New Asgard, before heading back into space to travel with the Guardians of the Galaxy. And that was everything you need to know before watching Thor Love and Thunder. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.